work with. And when October 7th happened and our department started coming together, we realized it was really important that we put out a statement as a department to make sure that we are standing in solidarity with Palestine, to be able to draw the connections between what is happening here locally, what is happening here in the United States, to what is happening globally around the world, and in this case specifically Palestine and Gaza. And we did write a letter published on October 20th that I'm happy to share, but this really started the conversation here at Peralta. And there's also been some incredible student organizing across the campuses, especially at Berkeley City College, that I also want to shout out and honor in this time. So I'm very excited that we have three deeply respected panelists that I want to introduce. And so I'm going to read their bios. I'm going to ask that we're going to have about an hour of discussion with the panelists with a set of questions. And then afterwards, we'll have the last about 20 minutes to do a Q&A. What we're going to ask is, if you have any questions, near the end, we'll have cards that you all can put your questions in. And Abashid's going to be able to collect those and be able to share those with the panelists. If your question is not answered by tonight, we'll stay after a few minutes. If anybody wants to come to the panelists directly to ask any questions, I know you all are going to be great at just asking for just lines of respect and active listening. This is a time for us to really listen to folks who are doing organizing on the ground in the community. So I do ask for us just to honor the parameters of respect. So let's start with introductions here. So we have Sharif Zakout, who is an organizer with the Arab Resource and Organizing Center. He was born and raised in the Bay Area. His family is from Gaza. He's an artist, musician, and a former ethnic studies student. So let's give some love for Sharif. Next we have Adan Deeb, who is a Palestinian biology master's student at San Francisco State University. Ooh, alma mater. She's a longtime scientist, educator, and mentor, and is passionate about environmental justice and creating spaces that promote equitable scientific learning. She is also a longtime member and current board member of the General Union of Palestinian Students. She has been organizing with GUPS for 3 years. Through her tenure at GUPS, Adan has helped plan educational events, protests, walkouts, and served on a panel discussion for Palestine. In addition to completing her master's research, Adan also teaches at San Francisco State University and works for SaveNature.org, a conservation-based nonprofit where she helps bring hands-on science education programs to Bay Area youth. So let's give a warm round of applause for Adan. And I'm also excited that my good friend Sara here, Sara Shor, and this means a lot to me that she's here tonight. She has a little one, a baby at home, so I know it takes a whole set of collective community care for Sara to be here. Sara is a volunteer with Jewish Voice for Peace and was born, raised, and lived most of her life in the East Bay. She is a descendant of Jews who survived discrimination and programs in Eastern Europe and comes from a family led by strong women who taught her to always stand up in the face of injustice. She currently works as a climate justice organizer for a grassroots multi-faith organization campaigning against the fossil fuel industry and for a just transition for all. So let's give a warm round of applause for Sara. I also love the environmental justice, the climate justice connections to what is happening in Gaza, and hopefully we can even go into that a little bit today. So for some of us, y'all might be organizing around this. Maybe some of y'all, you have family in Gaza or Palestine, and for some of you, this might be the first time you're really engaging in this topic. And so I wanted to start off with Sharif, who has also friends and family in Gaza. Sharif, if you can provide a little bit of a historical context to Gaza and Palestine, and provide a little bit of an update on the current situation in terms of what's happening in Gaza right now.
Yeah, thank you. Hello. Can y'all hear me? Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. I'm really excited to just kind of talk about the political conditions that kind of led to where we are today and what we're seeing in Gaza, and how specifically the United States has been not just supportive of this, but has been actually a main collaborator in this current assault on Gaza. So I want to start out, and I had asked actually to put just a map of Palestine up on the screen, because I think it's important for us. I know for us as like US-based folks, geography isn't our strongest suit, but it's important to recognize like where this land actually is. So Palestine sits literally at the intersections of Asia, Africa, and Europe. It is a very strategic location. It is near waterways. It is a very fertile land. And more importantly, it has many historical religious contexts to it, especially within Jerusalem. And so I want to start off by saying that oftentimes one of the main pieces of propaganda that we hear is that this is an ongoing war between the Muslims and the Jews that's been going on since biblical times. This is an ancient war where people have been fighting for this land for thousands of years, if not millennia. And I think the first thing to note is that we need to dispel that talking point. This is actually one of the most modern examples of settler colonialism to this day. And when I mean settler colonialism, I'm speaking specifically about people who have come from Europe, who have weaponized the trauma and just all of the devastating things that have happened through the Holocaust in Europe to facilitate the transfer of people into Palestine by removing the indigenous people of Palestine. And so oftentimes we hear the word Zionism, and there's also a lot of confusion around that. What is Zionism versus anti-Semitism versus Judaism? And I want to talk about this because it's actually the Zionist movement that facilitated the creation of the State of Israel, and to this day the Zionist movement in maintaining the State of Israel. So Zionism, I like to explain, is akin to manifest destiny, right? So manifest destiny here in this country, it's not the same as Christianity. If you were like, I'm against manifest destiny, you wouldn't be like, oh, you're anti-Christian, right? Manifest destiny uses Christianity as a vehicle to justify colonial expansion in this country, whereas Zionism uses Judaism as a vehicle to justify colonial expansion in Palestine. And for those of you who may have seen, there's actually a clip of a young Joe Biden who says very firmly, I'm a Zionist. And if there weren't an Israel in the Middle East, then we would have to create an Israel in the Middle East to best serve our US interests. The historical context of Palestine, before Palestine was actually chosen as this political project for Zionism, it was actually proposed that the State of Israel would be in modern-day Uganda, Kenya, or Argentina. They ultimately landed on Palestine because of the historical connections with Jerusalem and being able to use Zionism as a hook, again, to justify settler colonial expansion. Zionism is a political ideology. It is not religious. There are many Jewish folks who will speak here today to Zionism and what it means. But Zionism, what we understand as a white supremacist settler colonial ideology. And so in the creation of the State of Israel, this happened in 1948, shortly after the end of World War II, where the UN decided to partition the land. About 47% of the land going to historic Palestinians, and then about 53% of the land going to the new Jewish settlers that were coming in. However, how this actually came about was really more and more confiscation of Palestinian land, where over 500,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homes, many of them not knowing that they were actually going to never be able to come back again. So oftentimes you may have seen the symbols of keys, for example, used by Palestinians. The key is a symbol of our return. To this day, many of us actually still have the keys of our historic homes, whether or not they're still there, as a symbol of our return. So my grandmother personally, she was 8 years old when she was actually kicked out at gunpoint by essentially a mafia. It was a gang that was funded and given resources by the United States and Britain. And then it had created kind of the new State of Israel that continued to kind of fortify itself and develop itself as there was ongoing Palestinian resistance. I'm brushing over a lot of history, so excuse me, I'm gonna then kind of shift a little bit into modern day history. So fast forward from 1948, which again, many of our grandparents are still alive from that period. These are people who are still have that historic memory of being displaced from Palestine. And so fast forward to today, what we're seeing actually is we're seeing an increase, basically settler colonial project of continuing to confiscate Palestinian land through violence, through different governmental policies, and specifically, I want to talk about the post-Oslo agreement. So kind of Oslo was in the early 90s where they had made agreements where the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was kind of this coalition of different political parties within Palestine, who finally decided, you know what, we are gonna sit at the negotiating table with Israel after years of violence because we want a path to statehood. The Oslo peace agreements were initially supposed to be a pathway for Palestinian leadership to eventually get their own state. But what happened instead is it turned into the Palestinian Authority, which we have today, and they essentially became an administrative body that has facilitated the occupation on behalf of the state of Israel. So now we're actually seeing, in many ways, our own political parties who've come out of resistance have now turned to actually facilitate the very occupation that they were fighting initially. Many Palestinians are still struggling with a lot of this history today. And well, how much time do I have? I can really get into all this.
You can go another like 5 minutes,
Okay.
10 minutes, up to you. But
And so today we have actually Palestine that's divided ultimately in different ways. You as if you are a Palestinian, depending on where you are in that territory, where you are on that land, and for us that is considered all of our land, we have different legal statuses and designations. So over here on the right side, you can see it say the West Bank. There's this little area here. The West Bank right now is what we would know as like the Palestinian territories. That is facilitated by the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government. If you go into the West Bank, you'll see that there's an actual like wall. There's an apartheid wall there that was actually built by the same people who built the wall between the US and Mexico border. The same people who are profiting off of that built these apartheid walls in the West Bank that cut through Palestinian territory. And to this day, they use policies like, oh, if you don't tend to your land in X amount of time, it'll be confiscated by the government. But they use walls and checkpoints to actually limit the movement of Palestinians so that they are unable to tend to their lands or unable to actually move around. Checkpoints, similarly, what could take 10 minutes, this could be a walk to school, it could be a walk to work, could take 3 hours or more. And checkpoints essentially are places where there's fixed checkpoints and floating checkpoints. A fixed checkpoint is a place where folks already know there's going to be Israeli military officials who are going to look through your items, who might hold you up, who may strip search you. It's a very undignified and dehumanizing experience. Imagine going to an airport, but they would actually have you stripped nude, and they may not even let you through at the end. They have total control over the Palestinian population, and what adds insult to injury is you have people who can come from all over the world. If they claim that they are of Jewish heritage, they can get citizenship and subsidized housing within 72 hours. And so we see actually many of these military officials are people who grew up in the United States, 18, 19-year-olds who are bullying Palestinian elders who have lived there their entire lives. And then you have also what is known as Israel proper. For many Palestinians, we call that 48. We call it 48 because that is the year that land was taken from us as Palestinians. And even if you are what they call an Israeli Arab, a Palestinian with Israeli citizenship, you are still treated as a second-class citizen. What I want to make clear here is Israel was built to be and is maintained as an ethno-state. And I think that we really need to grapple with this because we shouldn't believe in any type of ethno-state, because if you do not fall within that ethnicity, you are always going to be treated as a second or third class citizen. So there are many people, for example, living within Israel, Palestinians, who do learn Hebrew, who do go through the Israeli school systems, But there are laws, for example, where they can't like speak Arabic at work, or they can get targeted for merely being Palestinian by dangerous settlers. Settlers by law are required to actually be armed, mostly in settlements within the West Bank. They are by law required to be armed, and the Israeli army by law is required to protect settlers. So what we see are actually instances where settlers will go into the homes of Palestinians, will take it over, and will call the army to come support them and back them up. And that's how they are literally still taking some of that land. We have families that we know who literally live with settlers like in their downstairs area, almost like a duplex, because they've just taken it over and there's nothing they can do about it. And families who actually try not to leave their homes because they're trying to defend it from people just literally coming in and taking it. And then within 48, you also have Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, you also have different legal statuses. For Palestinians who are from Jerusalem, born in Jerusalem, you have to prove that consistently to the Israeli government that you are of Jerusalem status. And it's so strict, actually, that if you are a Palestinian from Jerusalem and you fall in love with another Palestinian from Ramallah in the West Bank, your spouse from Ramallah is not allowed to move into Jerusalem. But if you move to Ramallah, you lose your Jerusalem status. So there are policies that actively keep Palestinians away from each other. And then lastly, I want to give a little more attention to the Gaza Strip, because this is obviously this has been kind of this has been the urgency at the moment around Gaza. And so Gaza, it's this little strip of land. You can kind of see it. It's touching the northern Sinai. It's on the water over there. The Gaza Strip, just for like a comparison, is about the size, is actually a little less than this, is about the size of San Francisco to San Mateo. Now, ever since 2007, the United States and the State of Israel decided, you know what, we are going to hold elections for Palestinian society. And so what had happened was Hamas, an organization that is designated as a terrorist organization here within the United States, decided to run. They were never a governing body to begin with, and many claim actually they were not interested in governance, but they saw this as one pathway to actually being able to have some level of legitimacy. To the surprise of the United States and Israel, Hamas won, and in response, Israel had forced them to say that if they are going to essentially become the next governing body, then they would be required to actually have a unity government with the PA, that they would have to basically accept the state of Israel and put down their resistance. There's been years and years of bad faith agreements with the Palestinian Authority and the PLO and the state of Israel. So Hamas basically agreed to everything but putting down their arms until there was peace, essentially. And so in response, Israel created this blockade on Gaza, which we still have today. There hasn't been elections since 2007, and more than half of Gaza are children. They were also not a part of these elections, obviously. And in the Gaza Strip, even though they have a little bit more mobility of movement within Gaza, different from the West Bank, they do not have the means to actually self-govern in the ways that they need to. And what I mean by that is, Palestinians have no control over their borders. They have no control over their airspace. They have no control over the waterways that are near them. They have no control over the drinking water. They have the state of Israel literally counting the amount of calories going into Gaza. And so they have no power in being able to actually shift the situation because the blockade has made it so difficult and unlivable for Gazans. And this was pre-October 7th. This has been seen as a humanitarian crisis for years now. If you are 16 years old and you are still alive in the Gaza Strip, you've gone through at least 6 bombardments of your lifetime pre-October 7th. The psychological, the psychological health of children especially is incredibly low. Suicide rates are incredibly high. There's lack of medicines, basic necessities for families. And I mentioned kind of the size of it. Like San Francisco, again, is about 860,000 people. Gaza is 2.4 million people living in a small space. You can drive through Gaza in one day, there and back with ease, multiple times. And so Gaza is literally known as the densest place in the world per square foot with the amount of folks who are there. And so what we have now is what we're seeing is, after October 7th, we're seeing just an intensified humanitarian need and a need for being able to actually call for ending the blockade on Gaza. And I want to name also that there have been many attempts to try to end this blockade through both peaceful and non-peaceful methods. So some examples I'll name is in 2014, there was the Mavi Marmara Freedom Flotilla, where different ships from different countries decided they wanted to block, or they wanted to go through the blockade on Gaza, and they were going to bring food and medical supplies. Those ships got boarded by the state of Israel. I believe it was 4 people who were killed from other countries, and to this day, nothing has happened since. They confiscated all of that aid. In 2018, there was the Great March of Return in Gaza, where thousands of Gazans decided to walk to the border peacefully to demand that they need an end to the blockade. And they were met with sniper fire, chemical weapons like white phosphorus, and more attacks from the Israeli army. And so they have had a huge history of trying many different tactics with many different political affiliations of trying to address ultimately the core issue, which is settler colonialism happening in the region. I'm glossing over a lot, I apologize, but I want to give some other time for folks to speak on this. But what we're seeing today ultimately is an intensification of the conditions that have already existed in Gaza, and now things are incredibly dire. I have family members, and I'm unfortunately to say that I've had literally a dozen members of my family who have been killed in the last 2 months, and I'm like the lucky one. I have members of my community who have literally lost upwards to 40 people in their families, 60 people in their families, entire lineages that have been literally wiped out. There is no safe place in Gaza right now. And historically, Israel has always been a bad faith actor with the Palestinians, despite what they tell them. And we see examples of this when they're telling Gazans literally they will be safe in the south, and now they are also bombing the south of Gaza. We'll talk more about that, but I'm going to go ahead and pass it on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharif. And I think for us, I was saw something that says we need to talk about it in the context of genocide. When you have 40 to 60 people in a lineage being killed, that is by definition a genocide. And I think sometimes people forget that when they frame it in certain types of media discourse. So I want to bring it to back here in the Bay Area, and I think San Francisco State, as a former student there, has a very ripe space of activism and organizing, and also a lot of repression against organizing around the issue of Palestine. And so Adan, as a graduate student there, I would love for you to share a little bit about the General Union of Palestinian Students, the history of it, how has the climate on campus affected the way that GUPS organizes, and also if you could share, since October 7th, have you seen a shift in terms of student and youth organizing as well?
Yeah, totally. So I'll start a little bit with the history of the General Union of Palestine Students, because I think putting it in context with how it got started really shapes kind of where we're going and the work that we've been doing now. So it was started actually in 1959 in Cairo, Egypt by Yasser Arafat, who was taking refuge there. And it was kind of the first movement that started internationally and kind of spread across the world. So there were multiple chapters all over the US, all over the world, all fighting for the liberation of Palestine. And then in like the early to mid 90s, when the Oslo Accords were signed, Palestinians took that as like we are going to have peace now, like we are at the negotiating table, which Sharif talked about a little bit. We don't need to be fighting for the liberation of Palestine anymore. We're good now. And the PLO, which was funding GUPS chapters all over the world, pulled their funding basically from GUPS chapters. And so therefore all the GUPS chapters basically disbanded except for SF State. So we actually divested from the PLO's money, and that's why we were actually able to stay a chapter. And so right now we are the only GUPS chapter in the US. We're the last standing one, and then there's only 3 left in the world. So we're one of 3 GUPS chapters that are left from when they were originally founded in the late 1950s. And so that has kind of elevated like our status as a historical org. So we're a historical organization on SF State's campus. We have kind of special standing, which is pretty cool, and that kind of comes a lot from SF State's history with organizing, with protests, with activism, and with their mission to support political movements and people of color. And so GUPS has done a lot of really cool things on campus. A big thing was our Edward Said mural. So it's this Palestinian cultural mural that's on campus, and I believe it's the only one in the U.S. It was definitely the first Palestinian cultural mural ever to be put up on a college campus. There might be one more now, but it's still the oldest one standing, and that was put up in 2007, I believe. 2005. And we fought really hard to get that up. So GUPS members that came before me went through many meetings with our student government and with administration, trying to design the mural, trying to even get it up. There was a lot of backlash as to why we would get a mural, why we're important enough as a historical org to even have that, and so fighting for that in the first place was really difficult. Received a lot of backlash, a lot of hate from Zionist orgs on campus, Zionist administration, that kind of stuff, but it was finally put up, and so we have this kind of special celebration every year in November around Edward Said's birthday. And so it centers around Edward Said, who was kind of a huge figure for Palestinian liberation, the Palestinian struggle. And it kind of delves into San Francisco State history as well as Bay Area history, ties in all the organizing and activism and then into the liberation of Palestine. It's really beautiful. Feel free to look it up if you've never seen it. It's a super gorgeous piece of art. And then in addition to that, in 2020, we actually passed a BDS resolution through our student government. And so that was right around COVID, which was really hard, but we were able to get our student government to resolve to divest, boycott and sanction Zionist orgs, companies or other organizations that are either donating to Israel or receiving support from Israel in some way, which is huge. Because that's really hard to do, especially for a state school that receives government funding. That kind of huge movement can really create a lot of backlash. And so the work that we do, we have to be really careful about how we go about it and who we talk to, and we have to really know who our allies are on campus as GUPS because of the fact that we don't have private funding. We're a state school, we're a commuter school, and how we move on campus can really dictate what we're able to do in the future. GUPS has received a lot of repression and backlash, especially in the past around the mural, around BDS. We've been threatened to lose our office space, which we've had since GUPS was started on campus. They've suspended our org. They've done all kinds of things. Multiple members of our org have been doxxed, including me. Which is really hard because they literally put every aspect of your life, everything from 2016 all the way up to now is on this website, and they update it monthly. And people know who you are, which I think is a good and a bad thing. It comes with this special privilege of knowing that I'm an organizer, people come to you with questions, they come to you for safe space, they know that you are an ally, but at the other side of it, people are watching you all the time. And even, especially after being doxxed, so much information about you, personal information, is up on the internet for the whole world to see, and people can really use that in a bad way. And especially a lot of us in GUPS who are on board or who have more public-facing positions in organizing, a lot of us have family back in Palestine. I have a lot of family in the 48, and it's a huge concern for us to be able to say, okay, I am organizing, am I ever going to be able to see my family again? Being doxxed, being public, and that kind of stuff comes not only with risks moving on campus, but it comes with risks of am I ever even going to be able to see my cousins, hug my aunt, go to any weddings, that kind of thing. And so that's also something that we have to be super intentional about, is how we move and how we organize. But I think that GUPS is really beautiful because of kind of the community that it creates on campus. Our office is seen as this kind of safe space for all people. And it's really beautiful to come and to sit there and to know that everyone sitting in that office with you is an ally in some way. You're able to truly be yourself, to kind of let go of that mask that so many of us, like people of color, kind of put up when we're in spaces where we feel like we're maybe not the majority or we don't belong. You can kind of let a lot of that go. And I think that's something that's really beautiful, that kind of community that we've cultivated. And then kind of, we had a huge, we had a huge membership before COVID, and we kind of saw a drop during and after COVID because everything went online, a lot of people graduated. It was much harder to bring people in, and then also make sure that we were intentionally communicating with our members and bringing them up into board, into positions of leadership. But now, since October 7th, I think we've seen a huge resurgence of kind of passion in the youth and the student movement, not just at SF State, all over the Bay, all over the US, all over the world, and it's really beautiful to see. And I've gotten to experience it firsthand. I started at SF State, I joined GUPS online. Like my first GUPS meeting was a Zoom meeting, which is really crazy to say. And there were like maybe 5 or 6 of us, and I was like board and like 2 general members. And now we're huge, like we don't fit in our office anymore. And that's like really beautiful like to see. And I've talked to members of GUPS who have since graduated and said that it's beautiful to look at GUPS photos and see the resurgence of membership and the passion. And so the work that we do on campus, everything from like the walkouts we do to the teach-ins and the protests, and just even like social events where we get together, we have a little potluck, we drink tea. People come from all over campus and chat with us, and it's really cool to kind of see how their passion for this movement right now is bringing them in. And I think we're going to create like a whole bigger kind of class of organizers, of people who are movers and shakers, more so than we've seen in the past, especially since COVID. So I think that's like also really beautiful. Can't remember if there's anything else you wanted me to touch on. Okay.
Yes, student organizing. I didn't know all the history of GUPS, so thank you for providing that context. And I think what's interesting that this is an institution of higher learning here at Laney College is a lot of times, right, I remember being an undergrad and graduate student where there was always, the GUPS at SF State, or the Students for Justice in Palestine, and the level of pushback and repression that these student organizations receive and they continue to receive. And then even in graduate programs, people being told, don't ever put a public statement about Palestine, right? You could talk about racial justice, you could talk about gender justice, and I think there is, and I think it's because of the organizing that folks are doing and like the climate that you are shifting, Adan and all the student organizers, that people are able to be more courageous in speaking out and standing up. So I want to thank you for your organizing, right? It takes a lot of fearlessness to be able to do that, so thank you.
Can I add something?
Absolutely.
Sorry, your words just made me think of something, because San Francisco State is like a commuter school, it's not like, I went to my undergrad, I did it at the University of Kentucky, and it was very different. Like freshmen, sophomores, all the way up to seniors, like a lot of them lived in the dorms, they lived on campus, everything was centered, like their whole lives were centered around the campus. So it was easy to go to clubs, it was easy to go to events because it was like a 10-minute walk from you. That's not the case for San Francisco State, and for a lot of schools in the Bay, you're commuting an hour or 2 hours just to get to your classes, so it can be really difficult to find the time, especially if you're also working or taking care of family members, to go to a club meeting, and so that also comes with a unique set, I think, of difficulties. But it's really cool because despite those difficulties, you still see the passion and you see kind of this drive of students from all walks of life coming together for this cause and moving together. And I think that because of the way GUPS has kind of centered its mission and the way that we try to plan our events to where we bring people in. It's not just an action, everyone goes home. Like, we try to get them to stay, we try to get them to learn more. And those kinds of things I think also really contribute to how you can actually build up a movement even after people go back home to their houses. They can still stay plugged in. And I think that's also what's really cool about this movement in the Bay. because you see that everywhere, from Oakland to Berkeley to Richmond to SF to San Jose. You see people like congregating places and then going home, and that doesn't stop. You know, they create their own movements, their own protests, and like that kind of stems from what makes organizing so special and so unique.
Thank you, Adan. So I'm excited to have another organizer. It's really amazing, y'all. Like, I think when we think about a place where there's organic intellectuals and the grassroots, always listen to the grassroots organizers, because they're on the front lines to be able to speak to whatever topic or issue that we're discussing. So I love that every single person on this panel is an organizer, is an activist, knows the nuances and science of organizing, and is able to directly speak to this topic and this issue. So next we have Sara. And Sara, since you organize with Jewish Voice for Peace, I think there's a lot, if anybody's here on the Laney or Peralta listservs, especially faculty or staff, you may have seen a lot of conflation between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And I think groups like Jewish Voice for Peace are doing such a powerful job of organizing at the grassroots and international level to be able to voice the big difference and be able to say that you can stand against a war and militarism and occupation and still proudly be Jewish. So Sara, if you could share a little bit, like what is anti-Zionism, and how is like the organizing that you've been doing for Jewish Voice for Peace and other Jewish anti-Zionist Jewish peace organizations, how are you strategically mobilizing and addressing and pushing back against people who are conflating something like anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism?
Yeah. Hi everyone, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So I'll just say, as a Jew, the conflation of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is infuriating to me, and it's false. Anti-Zionism means opposing the political ideology of Zionism. That means opposing the state of Israel being an ethno-state, the persecution of Palestinians. It's not about being anti-Jewish, and anyone that tells you that it's just not true. Anti-Semitism is alive and well. There's absolutely anti-Jewish sentiments that are alive and well, but they are not the same as anti-Zionism. And I'll also just say that the anti-Semitism that is real is coming from the right. It's coming from the folks who are the same folks that are inciting violence against Black and brown people, against Muslims. And that is one of the reasons why it's so infuriating to see anti-Zionism being conflated with anti-Semitism, is because Jews actually need to be in solidarity with all of these marginalized groups. Jews absolutely have a long history of being oppressed throughout history, and this conflation with Zionism, which is a horrible, horrible system that in my mind is not in alignment with Jewish values at all, actually puts us in more danger as opposed to less danger. And so, to me, the most Jewish thing that you can be doing right now is standing up against oppression anywhere. And right now, that's absolutely happening in Palestine. It's been happening since 1948. And it's our job as Jews to say, this is not in our name. And you also see American politicians who are saying, we're doing this for Jews. There has been a long, long history in the Jewish community of anti-Zionism. From the beginning of the state of Israel, there were Jews that were pushing back against the ethno-state that did not think that this was a pathway to safety. I'll just add a little bit of context also. The state of Israel was formed in the aftermath of the Holocaust, which was an incredibly traumatic event for Jews everywhere, and it's something that's as you grow up as a Jew, it's something that's really pounded into you. We can never let this happen again. 6 million Jews were killed in, horrible violence. And the fact that has been weaponized, and that my people are now enacting a genocide against another people is sort of the most horrible, saddening, heartbreaking thing that I can ever imagine. And it's, we're seeing trauma lead to really intense, horrible violence against Palestinian people, and that is not the Jewishness that I grew up with. It's not the values that I've been taught. It's not the values that are in our sacred texts. And so I just want to say, like, there is a long history of anti-Zionism from Jews, and there's also a lot of unlearning that has to happen in Jewish community around Zionism. There's a lot of Jewish institutions across the US and across the world, synagogues, Jewish camps, all kinds of sort of Jewish organizations that propagate this Zionist propaganda to Jews, that in order to be a real Jew, or in order to protect the Jewish people, we have to protect the state of Israel. And that's something that as a Jew you're taught growing up, and it has to be unlearned basically by a lot of Jews who grow up in Jewish institutions. And so I think that right now that's happening more than I've ever seen it in my life. This is an issue that I've been pretty active on since I was in middle school, high school, and there's a lot more Jews here now. So that's great. They should have been here before. But right now, as we're seeing, horrible, horrific violence in Gaza, I think Jews are opening their eyes more and saying, this is not in line with the values that we've been taught around social justice. That is a part of our Jewish culture and our religion. There's a concept in Jewish religion that says every life is sacred, which, that means Jewish lives, and it means Palestinian lives, and it means every life. So, to me, standing up and saying something is, I grew up celebrating Passover with my family every year, which is a major Jewish holiday, and the whole holiday is about being liberated from slavery, the Jewish people being liberated from slavery, and that I was always taught that holiday was supposed to always remind us every year that as Jews we've been persecuted throughout time, and it's our job to say something, to stand up, to do something if anyone is being persecuted. And Sharif beautifully laid out the history of Palestine. Like, if we are in line with our values, we should be up in arms about this. And I'm seeing that happening more and more. And there's still a ways to go to help Jews decouple the relationship with Judaism and Zionism, because that brainwashing doesn't just happen in the media and happen in Jewish community. It's pretty widespread. So
Thank you so much, and it's helpful to hear. I think in any history we learn, when we're talking about historically marginalized communities, is knowing the longer history before any event happened, right? This has been an issue long before October 7th, and also there's been anti-Zionist Jewish activism that's been happening for centuries now. So we have to always, as scholars and as activism organizers, constantly be educating ourselves beyond whatever the news is or the hot topic. So since we're in the vein of organizing, and I'm actually going to ask if y'all have any questions right now. Alicia has these,
index cards.
Index cards, there we go. It's week 16 of the semester. My brain is fried. Okay, everybody else. So I was just going to pass out some index cards if you have any questions and you want to write those out for the panelists that we can share. But in the meantime, while Abhishek's passing that around, I wanted to go onto the topic of organizing, because I know every single one of you as an incredible organizer, and long before October 7th, And so if you can share a little bit, and maybe Sharif, you could, excuse me, share how can we stand in solidarity, how can we be in support of the people of Palestine and Gaza. Adan, as a graduate student, as a student activist, if you could speak to how can students and the larger community be in solidarity and engage with student organizing. And also, Sara, if you can share for anybody who's in the Jewish diaspora, to also how can you get involved in some of the anti-Zionist movement work at the grassroots level?
Yeah, I can go ahead and start. So I think one thing I want to make clear is that, you know, our government, specifically through our tax dollars, gives Israel roughly $3.8 billion a year, and that's not including the packages of military aid and other spending that they give regularly. Right now, I think it was about $14 billion they're trying to pass to the state of Israel, along with Ukraine and Taiwan. And so, for us, we have to recognize, like, there's always this question around why is Israel so particular to this? Why is it that we're focusing on the state of Israel? And injustices is happening everywhere in this world, including right here within our own borders. And you know, many of which is also like in connection to US imperialism in our histories. And I think one thing to note is Israel plays a very, very critical role in war making for the West, especially the United States. And historically, they have played a role in also continuing to repress all of our movements. So one way that we look at Palestine as AROC is like Palestine is not just a place, but Palestine is a lens for how we understand our world and social justice. So a little bit to talk about that, like the state of Israel literally created the Uzi, the Galilee, Semtex technology, many crowd control technologies, surveillance tools that are then literally used on Gazans, on Palestinians. Gaza is essentially a laboratory for weapons testing. Even now, what we're seeing is literally people like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, all that, taking videos of the destruction in Gaza as like promotional tools to continue selling more weapons to our government, to not just this government, but governments all around the world. The state of Israel has a live population where they can test this, say it's tested, and sell it to repressive governments like here in the United States to be used primarily on black and brown folks. So like an example of that is in Ferguson, uprisings in Ferguson 2014, they were using tear gas on black communities that was tested in Palestine, and Palestinians were tweeting people how to get that tear gas out of their eyes and how to take care of themselves. Israel also funded the death squads, the Pinochet government. It provided bodyguards for the Marcos regime. It's supporting Modi's India. It supported Bolsonaro. Like, Israel has a clear invested interest in selling weaponry to right-wing governments all around the world. So it's important to recognize that Israel actually has its hands in all of our movements. I know earlier we talked about climate justice, and I think one thing to keep in mind, like Israel is one of the largest like developers in green technologies, and I use quotations because many of these are false tools and technologies. There's no way in militarizing our way out of the climate destruction that we're in today. I was lucky enough or unlucky enough to go to the Conference of Parties that happened last year in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, as well as the year before in Glasgow. And Israel is usually one of the largest delegations to these climate conferences. Simultaneously at these climate conferences, they're not talking about the level of militarism and the level of impact that militaries have on our climate. The US military is the largest polluter in the world, and we don't talk about the military when we talk about the climate. And that all also connects to the like relationship we have with the state of Israel. And we're not even talking about even the environmental impacts of the bombings in Gaza. I heard this morning that right now the frequency of bombings is every 8 seconds. Every 8 seconds there is a bomb dropping in Gaza. Additionally, you know, the state of Israel is an outpost for Western imperialism. Israel is so heavily militarized. Again, you are required by law, there are some exceptions, but by law, Israeli society is required to go into the military. There is a high level of brainwashing. I actually recommend this site called New Profile, which talks specifically about the militarism of Israeli society. And it's so intense, like literally soldiers are just as common as trees. Soldiers are literally like teachers' aides in the classroom. The level of militarism and the level of propaganda and the way in which they view Palestinians, they literally see them as animals because that is the state curriculum that they are taught, and that is the level of propaganda that they are facing. And so when we think about Palestine, like a free Palestine literally means addressing imperialist interventions within all of our communities globally. It's also addressing the ways in which we understand humanity and the ways in which we value life, because if we see Palestinian life as valuable as we see any other life, then of course there's no way we would be standing around for this genocide. And it is very much a genocide when every single member of our community, every Gazan I know, has lost multiple family members in 2 months. Every single one. That is a genocide. And so for us, when we talk about how is it that we can support the people of Gaza right now, honestly, we as US citizens, we need to understand that we are inside the belly of the beast, that our tax dollars are funding genocide, and beyond that, they're also funding war making and militarism around the world beyond Gaza. Right now, it's hard to get money to Gaza because of the conditions of the blockade. I would say, yes, you can donate to Middle East Children's Alliance in Berkeley, who have water projects in Gaza, but those resources aren't getting there right now. So if you want to support the people of Gaza, I recommend continuing to put pressure on our electeds, continuing to put pressure on people around us, and to really challenge these propaganda, these notions of like, that this ethno-state is somehow the exception to like, oh, actually this is a good ethno-state, or that we have to really challenge the level of dehumanization of Palestinians. If you look at the media, it's always women and children in Israel are murdered, but females and teenagers are killed. It's even language like that that is incredibly dehumanizing when it comes to the ways in which we see Palestine. So my biggest suggestion is like, we need to recognize how our money is actually being used. And this one figure, as I mentioned, we give $3.8 billion of our tax money to the state of Israel, not including the all the other military spending we give throughout the year. Just in that $3.8 billion, Oakland's slice of that pie, Oakland, according to the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, Oakland gives $6,121,149 to that $3.8 billion yearly to Gaza. Or excuse me, $3.8 billion to Israel. That's 727 households that can be paid for public housing. That's 2,129 children receiving free or low-cost health care. That's the salary of 66 elementary school teachers. This 161 students with their loan canceled. And this is just Oakland. So this is very much a local issue because we are already involved in this issue, but we are involved in the wrong side. And so I urge folks to recognize, if anything coming out of this is that our oppressors are working beyond borders against all of us, and so too our solidarity must know no borders. We have to continue to push back against US militarism, against US imperialism, and recognize that a free Palestine means freedom and dignity for everyone. Thank you.
That was awesome. Thank you, Sharif. I just love listening. Like hearing other people speak, it's like, wow. I think from like a student perspective, I also from an SF State perspective, I really want to plug the strikes at SF State that happened in the late 1960s. That started, it was the largest student-led strike in U.S. higher education history, and it still is to this day. It lasted over an entire semester of students and faculty striking, and it actually resulted in the College of Ethnic Studies being born at SF State. It's the first program of its kind ever in the U.S., and in addition to the College of Ethnic Studies, the entire university had to change the way they operate. So now they are focused a lot more on students of color, students of lower socioeconomic status, like non-traditional, not rich white dudes. basically. And it changed basically everything about how SF State works, and that's why you see such an amazing kind of like congregation of people from all walks of life now that go to this university. And it really is a testament to what we can do as students, as youth, as young adults, when we come together under and with a united cause. You know, like we have, I think, often as people who are younger and are still kind of finding their ways in life, or maybe going through some sort of change in a phase of life, you kind of start thinking of like, how much power do I really have? Like, what really can I do, you know? And there's so much power in our voices as students, as learners. And I think it's important not to minimize the power of your minds and the power of your voice. And every single person here has the power to make change. And it's this ripple effect. You talk to one person, that person talks to a person, that person talks to a person. And that can really affect amazing change. And you see it, you know, all over the world. But I just really wanted to plug the strikes at SF State because I think that's an amazingly beautiful example of what really can happen when we band together as students. And I just really also want to say that, like, as students, I mean, everyone here is a lifelong learner, right? Like, we're always going to be learning, whether or not we're in school, whether or not we're actually taking classes. We should never abandon the idea of always learning and always kind of striving for a better version of yourself. But we have a special kind of place now because that's a huge focus of what we do. That's a big part of our lives. And you're not only learning information in classes that you take, but you're learning tools for critical thought. You know, like how to read a paper, how to write, how to parse out all the information that you're given and pick out the pieces that are really important to you. And that's really important, especially when you look at the way Western media frames things. Take the way that you learn critical thought and these critical thinking skills and the way you learn in the classroom, take it outside of the classroom. Look at Western media with the same critical eye. Why are they saying that Palestinians are dying, but like Zionists are being murdered? Why are they saying babies versus children under 18? Like, that matters, that lens matters, and being able to parse that out really changes the lens at which you look at things and the way you educate yourself, not just now, but through the future, and how you stay plugged into things all over the world. Because like Sharif said, this isn't just about Palestine, this is about every colonial, every imperialist movement, every movement that takes people of color and makes them less than in favor of what is seen as the white, like the good majority. And I also wanted to plug that, I lost my train of thought, you guys, I'm so sorry. What was I saying? Critical thought, Western media. Also because like a lot of us are paying for school and like boycotting, divesting, sanctioning, putting that pressure, that's what will work, right? And there's a quote that I saw through social media a couple days ago, and someone was saying that like, I've often wondered like how much a life is worth, and they said, today I learned that my life is worth $7,000 because that's how much money it takes to bomb an innocent Palestinian. And that's how much money they're investing in this genocide, you know, thousands, billions of dollars into killing human life, and it's because it makes them money. It makes the people in power money. And things won't change until these rich people start losing money. And that's why BDS works. It worked in South Africa. The same model that we're using for BDS in Palestine is the model that was used in South Africa during their apartheid movement. And so this is intersectional. This is international, and this movement can be applied in basically every aspect of our lives one way or another. Yeah.
Sara, I was going to ask, because there's some excellent questions, thank you all for, and the reason we're doing this format is because some previous events at Berkeley City College, we thought this would be a little bit more of a way to make sure we can get through the questions and have a little more useful conversation. But some of the things around the actions, someone asked about an accurate boycott list. Where do you all go for the best list in terms of divestment? And also just any other recommendations around actionable steps, as well as talking points. When we're thinking, you talked about Western media and discourse and critical thinking.
So as activists and organizers, how do you respond when someone's asked you to condemn Hamas? Right? Like there's certain discourse or talking points and so I guess I'm putting some of those questions together around actionable steps, boycott lists you go to, and then just what are some of your core things when people sort of pose certain questions to sort of stop the conversation around this larger conversation around settler colonialism and genocide?
Hey, okay, so for a list of places to boycott, the BDS website. Done. Like because they have a really comprehensive list of organizations that donate to Israel and support the genocide, but they also have, especially because right now we want to make sure that we have a concentrated effort. So they have narrowed it down to these big ticket companies that, especially around the holidays, get a lot of money, like Starbucks and like tech companies. Because people are always buying like new phones, new computers for Christmas and those kinds of things. And so there's like a list of kind of a few companies that they're asking people specifically to boycott. Starbucks, Disney, McDonald's are the big three that come to mind. If you have a Disney subscription, like Disney Plus, like cancel it, bro, it's not worth that. There's already, I saw on Twitter that a Starbucks employee got fired and then leaked all the recipes to Starbucks coffee drinks. So you can make it at home, and you don't need McDonald's if it's not that good for you anyways. You know what I mean? And so there's other ways to vote with your dollar, and smaller businesses. Even if you go to a grocery store or something that you're not it hasn't come out that they support this genocide or support Israel, it's still better to shop local. It's still better to support your own community and have your money uplift the economy and uplift the people that actually live and work with you. So that's a big step. And then Sharif can answer the other one for sure.
Sure. I just want to add a little bit more to that before I continue. I think I want to emphasize that most BDS efforts are very much an individualist one, where it's I will not purchase from Sabra hummus because it gives money to the Israeli army and it tastes like shit. Or I am not going to go to Starbucks because I can make that coffee at home, which is important. I want to encourage, and the BDS website that Adan is referring to is the Boycott National Committee, BNC. There's an official list of places that you can boycott. But two things I want to name about BDS and boycotts is one that BDS is another example of a very clear nonviolent tactic that everyone can engage with, that's an internationalist movement that was still considered a threat to this government and many other governments, and was still considered aggressive or still considered in some way just unacceptable for Palestinians to even boycott. They have anti-boycott laws all over this country. Literally, people who've lost their jobs have nothing to do with Palestine, but because they wouldn't pledge their allegiance to a state of Israel, to an apartheid state. But the one thing I would really like to also highlight, especially because we're in Oakland, is there's also other ways to boycott for for building long-term power. And so one example of that is how many folks have heard of Block the Boat? So for those of you who don't know, back in 2014, there was something that AROC was a part of called Block the Boat. And what happened was we had found out that there were Israeli ships coming to the port of Oakland, and some of the things that they were bringing were literally the weapons, surveillance technologies, all the tools I was talking about earlier. And many people wanted to go out and protest this boat, rightfully so. We as AROC, we actually really wanted to invest in, we want to build partnerships with labor, because this is important to build long-term sustainable relationships, not just with folks on the ground who support Palestine, but making those connections between workers' movements here locally and what's happening there. So the Trade Federation of Palestinian Workers, the dock workers in Palestine, actually wrote a letter of wanting solidarity from other workers around the world to basically stop unloading Israeli ships. In 2014, we organized over 5,000 people to the Port of Oakland, and that's where ILW Local 10, the International Longshore Warehouse Union workers, work. We went to their union hall for a month, 5 a.m. in the morning, every single day, coffee and donuts. Hey, let me talk to you about this ship that's coming in and why you shouldn't unload it. And that was so successful. We held down the port for 4 days, over 5,000 people, and that ship was not able to be unloaded. Since then, we continued to build with those workers. In 2021, the ship tried to come again. They stopped for 5 years. The ship tried to come again, and this time it only took 4 hours because the workers, we'd already built that relationship with them. They were like, yeah, no, we're not touching that ship. And actually, one of the stories that I really value is I remember in 2021, when I went to the union hall, there was a worker who was like really excited that this ship was coming. And I was like, yo, what's up with that? He was like, I'm a legacy longshoreman. My grandfather refused to unload apartheid South African ships. My father was part of 2014 Block the Boat, and now I get to be part of 2021 Block the Boat.
That's so beautiful.
And even beyond that, we saw, including yesterday, ILWU recently passed a resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, and they've made it a point to go to every single city council, whether it's Oakland, whether it's San Francisco, to make sure that their voices as labor is heard, and they aren't the only union doing this. So I really want to also uplift that there are ways where we can build long-term power with labor to actually boycott and divest from our tax dollars from these war-making industries and partners of war-making. To this piece around how we talk about, there's this thing where it's like, oh, but do you condemn Hamas? And I think the problem with that is, why is our humanity dependent on like this condition of our, like, where our politics are at? Like, it's almost like the all lives matter of like, we say, okay, well, Black lives matter. Oh, but do all lives matter to you? Like, the point is, we're talking about Gazans who are literally fucking dying of a genocide. That should be enough. There should be no conditions to that. We need our humanity recognized, point blank. So to those questions, we reject them outright because our humanity shouldn't be seen through a lens of, well, where are our politics and do we deserve to die or not? Ultimately, we have over, 18,000 Gazans who've been killed in almost 2 months, over half of them children. We need our humanity seen. There should be no condition to that. Everyone should be horrified by the level of violence that's been enacted on our people. Thank you.
I just want to speak to the activism piece because we've seen over the last 2 months thousands and thousands of people rising up across this country and saying no to this genocide and calling for a ceasefire. And ceasefire is just the beginning of what needs to happen, but it is the urgent call for right now. And it's working. There are shutdowns happening all across this country, bridges being shut down, direct action happening to shut down workplaces that enable this to happen. We've seen sit-ins at congressional offices and senators' offices all across the country. Really effective activism that actually is changing the narrative around what politicians are saying about what's happening in Gaza right now. So I'll just say, and in the Bay Area, we have been holding it down with lots of activism. There's been city council resolutions passed in a few cities in the Bay Area and more to come. That is something that people should get involved with and go and testify and say why you support these resolutions. Seeing that happen from the grassroots level and having that trickle up has an impact on politicians at a lot of levels that actually have the power to stop this from happening and stop this military aid from going to Israel. And so, get involved in activism. There's amazing student activism happening. There's amazing things to plug into all the time, and it's working. It's working, and we're going to have to continue that pressure, continue to shut things down, continue to say we're not going to have business as usual while we're watching a genocide happen in our name. So, in the name of Jews and in the name of the U.S., we are funding this genocide. So there's a lot we can do, and our federal elected officials actually have the power to stop this from happening. And so we should be going to them, we should be calling their offices, we should be setting up meetings with them, we should be showing them that the majority of Americans do not support what's happening, and that's actually true. The majority of Americans do not support this and do support a ceasefire, and our politicians are not representing us. And it's so stark what's happening in Congress right now. There are so few Congress people who have stood up for a ceasefire, and the majority of Americans want that. So we need to continue to put that pressure on our elected officials and let them know that they need to represent us.
So someone, and this started off, you know, when we're thinking about doing this panel and the importance of community education, historical education around this topic, and political education. And so one of the questions was, what are some of the classes and curriculum that a student can take to learn more? And then there was also a question that was received that was specifically around censorship and how there's a lot of people losing jobs, especially within institutions of higher learning, but also in other spaces for speaking out against this genocide. So really just if you all have any recommendations or also just suggestions, right? Because these are things that I know in our department here at Ethnic Studies, we have realized that we have a lot more work to do in stepping up to the plate to be able to address the learning that faculty, students, and community need. So I want to open it up if you all have any suggestions or comments on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say I think being in the College of Ethnic Studies and taking any classes that are geared towards history of political movements in the US, history of people of color, and it doesn't just have to be the classes that you take. There's plenty of resources out there, so look for books that are written by Palestinian authors, Edward Said is a big one, or look for books or autobiographies that have been written by other people who have spearheaded movements like Nelson Mandela, like Assata Shakur, those kinds of people that you can really learn from what they do and apply it to our movements now and in the future. Because if we don't look at what has happened historically and put everything in a context of where did we come from, we'll never truly be able to go into the future with actual intention and purpose. So I think that's a really big one. And then fighting censorship and then fearful of losing your job and stuff, that's something that's it can be difficult, I think, especially because all of us can be afraid of getting backlash, especially at our schools. And then if you have one job and that job pays your rent and you lose that job, what are you going to do? That's something that's really difficult. I think fighting censorship is a big one. I think having people in your community who you can trust is really important. So as members of GUPS, the reasons that we've been able to do a lot of the work that we've been able to do is because we have members of our community, we have other historical orgs that have stood by us in the past and we know will take up arms with us. There are orgs that every time we put out a protest or every time we put out an event, they always do security for us. We don't even have to ask. They just come with their yellow vests and their megaphones. They already know that they can help us out in that way. And I think having people who you can trust, faculty members or people on administration that are will be there for you, or other members of your community who can rally behind you is a really good way to fight that. And I think also a lot of people can be afraid of being censored or being doxxed. And to that, I say that yes, it's rightly so, it sucks to be doxxed, it sucks to have that kind of backlash, but on one hand, I know I'm standing on the right side of history by speaking up about this, and me being afraid of having my information leaked is a small price to pay for saving somebody's life. There are so many people who are dying, there's whole generations of families that are being lost, and the risks are worth it, in my opinion, and I think being able to keep that context and keep that power through the fear is really important for this movement. And then, so also, I just wanted to say, sorry.
No, sorry. I'm sorry.
I have a personal anecdote because the nonprofit I work for, my boss tried to host an event at a Zionist cafe in San Francisco, and I got the email and I contacted all my friends and I was like, oh my God, like what do I do? Because I'm not, like, I plan events for the org, like I'm not planning this event. And like it's stuff like that where it's like seeing people above you, people who are in charge of your paychecks, like say like, oh, we want to host this speaker that's like definitely Zionist, or we want to cater from this restaurant, or we want to host it at this cafe. Like you have to have the power and I think the security to go up to that person and say like, yeah, we're not doing that. I'm not hosting it at this cafe, but we can do it at this one. Or I'm not catering this restaurant, but here's one that gives you similar food, but it's like actually, you know, socially conscious. And bringing it back, I think, to the ideals of whoever you're working for, you know, like as an environmental org, it's like we're standing up against environmental racism, we're standing up for conservation, and so I refuse to have our money go towards an org that does, like, you know, that contributes to environmental racism, that pours concrete in waterways, that, you know, sprays pesticides and pulls up olive trees of my people in the name of like a conservation benefit. That's not how that works. The cognitive dissonance is there, and you can tie that into wherever you work, whatever you do, and I think keeping that in mind is also important.
Yeah, I really wanted to uplift one thing that you said specifically around like standing on the right side of history, and that I really want to emphasize that this moment takes a lot of courage. I think we tend to romanticize a lot of the history of like fighting against the Vietnam War or the civil rights movement. I'm sure many of you have heard this, like, what would I have done if I had been there? This is there, this is now. These are the conditions that people have always faced when standing on the right side of history. These are the conditions people have faced whenever they have held unpopular opinions that their government does not hold. We are facing doxing, we are facing violence, we are facing threats to our safety and security, we are facing people calling us all sorts of things, from terrorists, racists, anti-Semite, all for literally just existing as Palestinians. And so I really want to emphasize that this moment takes a lot of courage. I also think that it's important to understand Zionism, because a lot of this tends to there's a chilling effect. There's a lot of this that tends to get quiet when people start to throw around that you're anti-Semitic for standing up against a genocide, or for literally calling a ceasefire, which is one of the most bland, mildest demands you could ask for. So I think it's important for us to recognize, if we understand white supremacy, if we understand racism and all of these different isms that impact our life, we have to recognize Zionism is very much also embedded into American society, within our education systems and the way we understand the world, and we have to also deconstruct that. Whether or not you are Palestinian, Jewish, anything, if you are living in the United States, you have been indoctrinated by Zionism, and we have to unlearn that.
Yeah.
And lastly, in connection to ethnic studies, even ethnic studies has become a battleground around Palestine. So how many of you all know that a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, that ethnic studies was passed statewide for California, right? I'm sure many of you may not know that there was actually a huge battle around that, not because of whether or not we should have ethnic studies, but around who gets to define what ethnic studies is. So what ethnic studies is, or at least the way I was taught, is really interventions in power, recognizing patriarchy, recognizing racism, recognizing all of the ways in which power comes together to basically how we live our lives today and why we are where we are. It's really to question power. What California has pushed for, and what we have technically as a state curriculum, is ultimately a depoliticized multiculturalism. It's like, oh, I'm different, you're different, it's all cool, we eat different foods, cool. The issue of Palestine and militarism was heavily censored when it came to fighting for statewide ethnic studies. In fact, the two communities specifically censored was Arab American Studies and Pacific Islander Studies. And Pacific Islander Studies was actually cut, a lot of it was cut because they were drawing attention to the level of militarism and the climate impacts also on the Pacific Islands through military testing of weapons and the ways in which it's impacted our world. So I think it's also important to recognize, like, even these fights around ethnic studies, critical race theory, Who has power? Israel is literally a nuclear-capable military power that is backed by the strongest military force in the world, has one of the most sophisticated armies, and Palestinians barely have enough to govern themselves. So there is a clear difference of power, and as ethnic studies students, we should always be questioning power. And so I just want to say that yes, take ethnic studies courses, but sometimes we have to also go beyond that. And other books include, like Ilan Pape's An Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, The 100 Years Wars on Palestine, Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Davis. There are many resources out there, and so I encourage you all actually to just look for them because they are out there, especially in this moment.
There are actually Palestinians who have gone on social media and compiled lists of books to read and people to look out for. So search for those because people have already done the work for you. So especially right now in this movement, it's a great time to get educated and do some reading.
Can I just say also, follow Palestinians that are on the ground right now in Gaza who are reporting about what's happening firsthand. It's very informative to get a firsthand view of what's happening since the mainstream media is not covering what's happening and so many reporters have been killed in Gaza. And also just wanted to say, support organizations like AROC that are under attack from Zionists and are being targeted right now for the work that they're doing, and we have to support them. So please support AROC, support other organizations that are under attack right now for the great work that they're doing, and support folks that are being doxxed in your community too.
And
I'm sorry, just one thing about doxing. There is strength in numbers, so remember that.
there is strength in numbers. I think that's also why I think that doxing is it's such a small price to pay for spreading the voice and the power of Palestinians, especially Palestinians on the ground in this movement, because they're losing so much more than we are. And this is something my dad always used to tell me, especially when I was younger and kind of a lot more up in arms on social media. He was like, be careful what you tweet, be careful what you post, what if you can't get a job because of how vocal you are about Palestine? And I was like, okay, Baba, if a job doesn't, if they don't hire me because of what I'm saying, I don't want to work there in the first place. And so that's also something to remember is your labor is power. If withholding your labor is a big thing, especially now in light of all of the CSU strikes that have happened. SF State had a strike yesterday. Today's Wednesday. Yeah, yesterday. And that they're going on all over the CSUs. And so withholding labor, withholding money, using your voice, that's important. And that goes into what I wanted to add was that not all support needs to be monetary. Sometimes all it takes is your time, calling your reps, or amplifying the voices of Palestinians on the ground, or just talking to a friend, or just a hug. Checking in on your Palestinian friends is big. I think especially in this movement, you really learn who your real friends are, and there are friends I've had from childhood who have been dodging my texts and calls and not posting, and it really teaches you who's really in support of who you are. Whether you're Palestinian or not, if you are posting and maybe someone in your friend group isn't posting, that says a lot about what they prioritize, and what side of history they're willing to be on, and how willing they are to unlearn, Zionist propaganda, because we learn it all over, and it's very prevalent in the U.S. Through our educational system, and especially through ethnic studies, and to add on to what Sharif was saying, history is told from the point of view of whoever won, So it's often, especially growing up and taking U.S. history, you realize after the fact, as you unlearn these things, that everything that you learned was from the side of the colonizer, from the side of the oppressor, because they're the ones who won, and they're the ones who get to write what actually happened. And you're actually seeing that happening in real time with Palestine. They're censoring people, they're rewriting things, they're burning books, and all of it is because they don't want the history of Palestine to be known. And once they wipe out every Palestinian, that'll be much easier for them to do. So remember that that's where it's going. And if we don't do something to stop it now, then there might not be a Palestine to fight for.
Right on, team. And I know there were some other questions that came in, and I know we're at time. I do want to encourage folks to stay after for a few minutes if you have any questions for the panelists. And also know here at Laney College,
in our ethnic studies department, we have been having conversations about the curriculum that our own voice and the things that we also need to be developing here, and working in collaboration with community and the experts on the ground to be able to build that. And also continuing that conversation around liberatory ethnic studies and how do we have these conversations of internationalism, talking about anti-militarism, being in solidarity with Palestine. How do we do that by, you know, what we're presenting and what we are studying and offering here at Laney and in Peralta. So stay engaged, keep a loop in for like next semester too for the upcoming, you know, teach-ins and events. I know this is just the beginning of many collaborations. And let's just give one more thank you and round of applause to Sharif, Adan, and Sara. And if you all, again, want to follow, you can make sure you can donate or follow on social media or follow their listserv for we have AROC, the Arab Resource Organizing Center. We have GUPS, the General Union of Palestinian Students. And then we have Sara, who's part of many organizations, and I know y'all are part of many organizations, but Jewish Voice for Peace. That's a good start. And like y'all said, like the dope thing, y'all have computers on your phone now. You know, there's so much information there, so there's beautiful ways to engage, to follow folks on the ground. And I know this just cut the surface, but there's so many more conversations to have. But please network, please build, stay in touch. Much love to y'all. Thank you all so much.